And this is advice I will very gladly say I was wrong about. There is no shortage of bad music producer advice on the internet between social media, forums, and YouTube. And in this video, we're gonna take a look at some common advice that's given that's either really bad or requires more context than just do X. Now, I'm not making this video in response to anyone, nor am I trying to create unnecessary drama in the music producer community. Instead, I wanna share my thoughts on a lot of this advice because a lot of beginner to intermediate level producers take these as gospel truth when there's usually a lot of broad advice given that might actually hurt your ability to progress and not help it. So let's start with number one, and it is a classic roll off the low end on everything except the kick and the bass. I'm just gonna say it outright. I don't do this, and I don't recommend this either. I do remember hearing this advice very early on when I was learning and thinking, oh yeah, you know, this makes sense, right? And I was just doing it because all these videos told me to do it. But what happens when you do this is you run the risk of actually sucking the life out of your song. The thought process behind this idea is that the kick and the bass contain all of the low-end information that your song needs, so you just take it out of everything else to remove any sort of frequency buildup in the low end or competition in the low end. The reality is that most of the tracks that you're working with don't even have a lot of information or any information in the low end that is actually competing with the kick and the bass. So the only time that I actually completely roll off the low end using a high pass filter is if I hear low end competition. I also do this on vocals. There are, again, some of these things where it is a good idea to do it, right? Vocals, acoustic guitars, but in most cases, I'm actually recording those things with a high pass engaged on the preamp or on the mic itself. Now, this is really the key thing here, is that you need to be making EQ moves because they need to be done, not because you are hunting for things to do. You need to use your ears to figure out if sounds are competing for that space before making a cut. And if you cut it from everything, you run the risk of making the song sound sterile and lifeless. So this is one of those things that at worst will make your song feel thin and lifeless, and at best is just a complete waste of time. Simply put, I think this is pretty bad advice. That brings us to number two, just trust your ears. And man, I love and hate this advice at the same time, because the reality is that you should trust your ears in some ways, right? Like if something sounds bad to you, then it's a good idea to trust that it sounds bad. But at the same time, producers who are not experienced have not properly trained their ears, which means that you can't really trust them properly to know what good or great sounds like. It's one thing to say that sounds bad and know that this objectively sounds bad, but it's another to have the ear training to know what a good sound is, as you know, just an example, to then have the ability to say, trust your ears. I see this a lot with performances too. Producers just don't know what a great performance is because they've not trained their ears or been around people to know what excellence is meant to sound like. This also goes for producing in a genre that you've never worked in before, right? You can't really trust your ears because you've probably not trained in that specific style or genre, so you might not really know what sounds to reach for or what kind of mix color you should be going for stylistically. So in those cases, you know, I would need to calibrate my ears, train my ears in the style or genre to then be able to say, I can trust my ears. So yes and no to this advice. But the key is that you do need to train your ears before you can trust them fully. Number three, always cut, never boost with EQ. This is bad advice, plain and simple. No professional producer or mix engineer thinks this way. Like if you're working with EQ, you are very likely going to need to boost. And in some cases, boost very aggressively to achieve a desired sound. I almost always end up boosting EQ on my vocals to add brightness and air. And in some cases, actually probably most cases, I push it really hard. I would actually say that not only should you boost, but when you boost, you should do it with boldness. I should preface all this by saying, if you are going to boost, you should probably know what you're boosting for. I'm not saying just boost, all right? I'm saying do things with the purpose, know what you're boosting for, why are you boosting, what's the desired outcome. So there are some things that you need to kind of like know before you get there, but just saying just don't boost and only cut, bad advice. It's just crazy how many videos I see of producers also pushing, you know, 1 or 2 dB on their EQs as if they're like gonna break something. Like guys, you probably can't even hear 1 or 2 dB difference in the first place. So, you know, push it till you hear it and and don't be so scared. This is also a topic I've covered with our mentorship students many times, where it seems like their mix choices are very timid, like they're doing things out of this fear of screwing something up rather than with confidence and boldness. My advice to them is, look, you gotta push it till you can clearly hear it. And this doesn't just go with EQ, this also goes with things like volume automation as well. But yeah, that's just trash advice. Number 4, more layers equals a bigger sound. And look, I know some of you are gonna be like, yo, Nathan, I've seen your sessions. You have like 100 to 150 tracks on every single project. But I think that this is actually generally pretty bad advice too. I am never counting layers and never thinking, okay, I need 3 layers of that thing to make it big. I need 4 layers of that thing to make it sound big. Like, I'm not doing that. Instead, I am thinking about how things sound and what it's missing, that I can use layering to help complement. When I think about layering, I'm thinking, am I layering to complement something or contrast something? I'm not thinking just make it bigger, so just stuff more stuff in there. So if I have a pad sound that is really solid on the low mids, but it's just not cutting through the mix, then yeah, I'm gonna add another layer that has more top end to cut through, that's gonna complement it in some way. I'm not gonna add a 3rd layer just because it's supposed to be bigger. I actually don't think that layering creates size in the way that you might think. You can actually get a lot more size from the fader, from space and stereo width than just throwing more layers. So no, more layers does not equal bigger sound. In fact, a song that often people comment on having insanely big low end that I produced called I Can Be the Villain has very few layers in the low end. Actually, that whole chorus, I think it's like 6 tracks total. But it was just great sound choice, and then I pushed the fader really hard. Number 5, pan everything except the kick, snare, bass, and lead vocals. Yeah, hard no on this one. Panning is a powerful way to create width, but if you overdo it, you're gonna end up with a song that sounds stretched out and completely hollow in the middle. And sometimes sound libraries already have panning information, by the way, depending on what types of sounds you're using, especially if they are in stereo. So in many cases, this is actually getting done for you. I like to think of panning more strategically than just do it because, right? I tend to personally use panning less than many other producers, and when I do use it, I try to make it very intentional. I have a lot of stuff in the middle. What you need to do is make sure that you balance your panning, so if you put something off to the right, you're not throwing things off of balance where it kind of feels like your ears are doing this, right? You want to make sure that you compensate by putting something else on the left. In short, you don't need to pan everything, and that certainly should not be the standard approach you have. Usually the way I operate is I don't pan it unless I feel like it needs to be panned, and I'm not operating from everything has to be panned unless it doesn't need to be panned. See how I kind of flip that around? I think that's helpful. Number 6, always double your vocals and use lots of layers. Unfortunately, this is becoming advice I am hearing more lately, and I hate it because it's creating this one-size-fits-all mentality around vocal production that makes everything sound the same. Now, hold on a second. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Nathan, I see your layers. You do lots of vocal layers, but you probably also haven't seen how many songs I do where I'm not using layers. 2, you need to realize I only share so many songs on the internet that I've produced, my friends. Vocal layering can be such a cool and extremely powerful and even necessary way of creating bigness and size and epicness and awesomeness, depending on the genre, right? But I've heard more and more of our students using doubles everywhere. Like, it's just standard operating procedure, and it just doesn't work a lot of the time because the song doesn't call for it. So a lot of producers are now operating with this just double everything. Just do it. This is what music is, rather than starting from a perspective of what is the song calling for? Do I even need doubles? Do I need harmonies? Does this thing need this? Is it okay with just a lead vocal here? Can I strategically use doubles? Do I need to use doubles the whole way, or can I pick and choose where those doubles go? Do I need layers all the way through? Or maybe I can wait to put those harmonies until the second verse to make it more interesting, so when those harmonies come in, it's actually more interesting. Or maybe I'm gonna wait till chorus 2 to like really explode and expand these harmonies, and maybe chorus 3 we'll do shouty vocals to make it even more unique and even more different. Or guess what? Heaven forbid there might be a song where you say, actually I think a lead vocal is sufficient the whole way through. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. My point here is that vocal layering is one of those things that is just because of the nature of social media and Instagram and more producers sharing how they make music, it's becoming more and more of like, people think it's just cool to do. and not actually thinking about what does the song really call for. Start from the position of what is the song asking me to do? And then execute those things based on the vision of what the song is. Number 7, my favorite, mixing will make a song sound pro. This comes with a major caveat, okay? Mixing is necessary, and it is required to accomplish a professional quality track. When people say this statement, that mixing will make a song sound pro, what they often mean by that statement is that mixing will fix a song that does not sound great and turn it into something great just magically. This is not true at all. Mixing only makes better what is already great. And any honest mix engineer will tell you that they cannot fix a crappy song. And if you find some guy on Fiverr saying, trust me, bro, I can take that thing and make it sound awesome, that's why it costs $5. Okay. If the production is poorly done with bad sound choice, poor performances, bad arrangement, and no editing, then mixing will literally do nothing to make it sound better. It will just make it sound different. So when people have the perspective that mixing is the magic, then they are often misunderstanding the point of mixing, which is to create focus, draw out the important moments. We're talking about using the fader and automation, adjusting coloration, balancing frequency, and creating space. And then obviously things like effects, delays and reverbs and all of that fun stuff. Mixing is awesome. I think people think I hate mixing or I'm anti-mixing. I'm not. I think mixing is fantastic. I think it's great. I just think people misplace and misjudge how important it is and when it actually becomes important. Because most of you watching, I'm just gonna say it, sorry guys, you're not even ready to mix. You're not even ready to do it. My business partner Andrew says this all the time. He's also the head of our student success in our mentorship. I love this so much. He says, most producers are learning the right thing at the wrong time, and I could not agree more. It's so true. You need to learn how to mix, but you need to do it at the right time, not putting the cart before the horse. Number 8, louder is always better. Unfortunately, what happens with this advice is amateurs end up with songs that are limiting so hard that it sounds like the speakers are gonna blow, and it also just crushes the low end in particular. I've been hearing more music in the last 2 years especially. It's insanely loud, but just sounds awful, like more than any other time earlier. I've been doing this thing for a long time. I've been making YouTube videos for almost 10 years. And I think a lot of the reason for this is because of the number of self-mastering tools that are out now, like God Particle and Ozone, Infected Mushroom, and there's probably a ton more. And most producers don't know how to actually use them. They don't actually understand what it's doing. So they just slap it on, make it crazy loud, call it a day, and they're like, bruh, it's freaking loud. You know what I'm saying? And look, I'm a fan of these tools. I love God Particle. I use it on every single project, but it's a massive problem when producers don't understand how to use them. So what I've seen over and over are songs that are just so loud, but the limiting is actually fraying the low end that it actually feels like or sounds like strands of rope. You know when you would like cut a rope and then the rope just like this comes undone? That's what your low end sounds like. It also makes the vocal sound so squeezed that there's no life and it just sounds like the vocalist's eyes are gonna like pop out from just getting squeezed so hard. So no, louder is not always better. Loud is good, right? But loud for the sake of loud often leads to over limiting and clipping. And it's also, by the way, let me back up. Depends a little bit on the genre. My partner Andrew produces a lot of hard rock, metal, that style. I mean, goodness, that's getting slammed super hard, but that is not going to be happening in like indie folk, right? Or like cinematic stuff that I'm doing. Cinematic stuff that I'm doing, it also depends. Like, am I going for like a really epic cinematic or a more like beautiful ethereal cinematic? You're actually going to treat those differently. But trust me, if you're hitting like -6 LUFS on like an indie folk song, probably too much. Make moves that are genre specific, but be really, really careful with self-mastering tools. They often give you the illusion of a nice and loud song, but end up just ruining the song, just ruins it. Number 9, vocal tuning and rhythmic editing is cheating. Now, this is one that just kills me because there's people on both sides of this. Those that go so overboard on it and it's like they quantize everything and everything is perfect and it's just whatever, it just sounds like mechanical and robotic.
Hey, fix that, skip that, fix this, fix this. Fix this.
And then there are others that are like total purists about it, like that's cheating, you can't ever do it, and whatever, right? So let's start with vocal tuning. Like practically every major song made in the last 20 years uses tuning, just so you know. And if you're like, but there's this one song I know, but look, that one song either is actually doing it still, but just more gently that you don't know it's doing it, or it's an outlier. Like maybe it's like the 1 out of every 100,000 songs, right? That's doing that. If you cannot hear the tuning, that usually means means the producer just did a really good job, unless the tuning is part of the vibe like in hip hop music. Now, I personally hate that sound. I don't like the sound of tuning artifacts. So when I tune vocals, my goal is to make it as transparent as humanly possible to preserve the natural performance, which also means, ready for this, that the performances must actually be good to start with. So don't think that this means you can just fix bad performances. Like, that is a massive myth. Just not true. It is wild how many people are like, oh, they're just fixing the singers with auto-tune. No. But when it comes to rhythmic editing, like quantizing and editing to the grid with like instruments, this is also done pretty much as the standard. In fact, when I worked at a recording studio, that was the first thing I did, was literally just editing drums and like rhythmically aligning drums. And that was on records as like getting radio play, okay? But there is such a thing as over timing, okay? In other words, you can make things so tight that it begins to sound smaller. I don't think I've actually talked about this before on the channel, but there are lots of times where I will intentionally not edit elements perfectly to the grid to help create the feeling of width, because the transients are not all identically matching like this. Like if there's a little bit of offset on the transients, it actually can make a song feel bigger. So if you have lots of layers that are quantized or timelined perfectly, I do think that you can offset, and that can be a good option. I am not prescribing this to you, like you must always do this. And this is actually kind of what I want to get to in this video. Most of this advice is like, sometimes sure, sometimes that makes sense, but not always. I hate advice that is just do this because I said so. Anyway, I'm just saying there's a balance here. But if you have rhythmic errors, right? Like you're rushing, please, goodness, time align those. Don't be dumb. No audience wants to hear your good enough takes. So please fix them. Or here's a crazy idea, get better performances. Number 10, you must gain stage. Okay, so gain staging is possibly one of the most overblown concepts in all of production, and people get very upset when I talk about this, but it's just true. The history of gain staging is the following. Fact check me, please. During the era of tape and large mixing consoles, gain staging was actually critical because every piece of gear has a sweet spot where the signal to noise ratio was best. So if you have the gain or volume too low, you're gonna get a hissing noise, and too hot, you're gonna clip and overdrive. Both of those, no bueno, right? With modern technology, this is mostly not an issue anymore. So if you record at minus 18 dB or minus 3 dB, guess what? You don't lose quality either way, and the noise floor is so low, it's almost never a problem in real world applications unless you're using very, very cheap gear. Like if you're using like a little $50 audio interface and then you're tracking at like negative 25 dB, that probably isn't gonna work, right? But this just means in a practical sense, like just don't clip. Like just don't clip and everything else is fine. And most plugins, by the way, do not have a true sweet spot unless they are specifically modeled after analog gear. So if you're using specific tools like that, then yeah, sure, it matters a bit more, but that range is still usually pretty wide. I'm crazy, man. I hear people commenting all the time, all these plugins are made for the sweet spot range. This is just not the case with most tools. In short, for most of you here watching at home, just don't clip and you're gonna be fine. Don't be stressing about this. I see people literally putting a gain tool on every single track at the beginning. That is just so dumb. It's not only a massive waste of time, but completely unnecessary. I have seen so many mixing tutorials out there where they start with this and they talk about like, you have to do this, and it takes them an hour, 2 hours to do this. Like guys, I have 2 songs on the charts right now. I've had songs on national television. I'm currently working on a major label EP. I never worry about this crap. And I'm not trying to say that like, look at me, I'm awesome. I am not an A-list producer. I'm not trying to put myself as like, I am thebomb.com. I'm just saying, look, it's gonna be okay, okay? It's gonna be okay. So just take a chill, right? The main takeaway here, just don't clip. Number 11, find bad frequencies by sweeping with an EQ band. Please, for the love of, oh my gosh, please stop doing this. This advice, by the way, I actually kind of gave early on. I didn't really mean it and just like go searching for it, but I'll get to this in a second. And this is advice I will very gladly say I was wrong about. So I had said years and years ago, started this channel almost 9 years ago. I used to say that you can go find bad frequencies by sweeping with a, sharp bell curve, right, to go find bad frequencies. But this is not where you start, okay? The problem is that when you hear this advice, the assumption is that you're gonna go digging for bad frequencies and you're gonna hunt for problems. And guess what? Every single frequency sounds really bad when you boost it by 12 dB or 6 dB. When you start hearing all of this bad stuff because you're boosting everything, you think, holy crap, this sound needs 15 different cuts because it sounds bad everywhere. You wind up with an EQ that looks like this. Well done, you just sucked the royal life out of that sound and probably also cut the fundamental as well, because if you boost the fundamental like crazy, it's not gonna sound good, which is the actual note being played, by the way. So a lot of people just cannot identify problem frequencies. That's including myself a lot of times. Like I can get close, I can usually be like, yeah, it's probably in the like 1 to 3K range, which by the way is a huge range, but you know, that just goes to show. But anyway, but I'm not gonna have perfect frequency recall. Like there are some people like, that's like 1,276 hertz. It's like, okay, cool. But instead of just blindly sweeping everything, it's like, let's just go find bad stuff. Instead, here's what you should do, right? Start by training your ears like we talked about earlier in the beginning of this video. And then you will only pull up an EQ to fix things when you are actually hearing problems that need to be corrected. So you're listening back to your song and you're like, wow, oh, that thing doesn't sound very good. I'm gonna go figure that out, right? Like don't go just hunting for it. Don't just be like, all right, time to go find bad frequencies. I never do this. I am never just saying, all right, time to go hunt for this stuff. You know what I'm saying? What I do is I find frequencies that need fixing by using my ear holes and listening, and then I'm gonna be like, huh, that piano sounds a little honky, or that vocal sounds a little boxy, or there's some weird resonance thing going on in here. And then I'm gonna go tackle that problem with an EQ. So identify the problem before going and searching for it. And then when you go to find it, you are actively thinking of what that specific frequency you want to correct is, so that when you are boosting and sweeping, because you might need to do that to actually find it, you're already thinking, okay, this is what I am looking for. Oh, that's it. All right, cool, now I'm gonna cut it, right? You already need to know what you're searching for before you go, because then it's gonna be pretty obvious which frequency it is. So, is sweeping frequencies bad? No. Is sweeping frequencies to go hunting for bad frequencies bad? Yeah. Don't do that. So let me know which of these you found yourself following blindly in the comments, and if you want to binge some of my most valuable videos on the channel, which there's many of them, then you can go through this entire playlist right here and just spend more time with me. I'll see you there.